drinking poet who died too young. On the record, Jim Morrison's 1971 death was from natural causes. But off the record, there have been numerous legends associated with his passing. Fellow Doors member Ray Manzarek has heard them all.
Well, here are the possibilities in terms of Jim Morrison's death. One, he died of natural causes and self-induced excess. Or Jim was murdered. Who knows what the CIA might have been capable of back then? Or Jim Morrison staged the whole thing.
To this day, questions still linger regarding Jim Morrison's death, stemming from his wild and unpredictable behavior.
The idea of becoming an adult was abhorrent to him. He just couldn't do it. Becoming an adult meant putting on the yoke of responsibility, and he was the wild child.
Wild child, full of grace.
Morrison's rebellious nature did not endear him to law enforcement. After a confrontation with a policeman during a New Haven concert in December 1967, he was charged with indecent and immoral exhibition. In a similar incident in Miami 2 years later, the singer was arrested for indecent exposure, making headlines around the world.
Police were busting us. Jim was arrested on stage in Miami and New Haven. It turned into absolute insanity and chaos, and all we wanted to do was rock and roll and poetry.
From December 1967 through August 1970, Morrison was arrested 5 times. But the artist who called himself the Lizard King lived life with no regrets. Those who knew him say he felt he only had a limited time in this world. By the time Jim Morrison was 27, the Doors were true rock legends with 8 top 40 hits and a fanatical following. The singer, however, was reportedly growing weary of the rock lifestyle. Jim thought himself a poet first and foremost, and he found playing the role of rock god suffocating. Jim confided to his friend Cynthia Summers.
Even though the rest of the world kind of perceives him as being the huge rock star that he wasn't happy with that. The thing that he felt was his real calling was to write poetry. And at heart, he had the soul of a poet.
In early 1971, Morrison moved to Paris with his common-law wife, Pamela Corson.
Jim Morrison said, I'm going to Paris to get away for a little while. I want to get my head together. I want to write some poetry. And I said, that's incredible. Paris is perfect.
I'll never look into your eyes again.
I think what gave Jim Morrison the most joy was when he wrote his poetry. He was very well read, and he was a craftsman with words.
Will be so limitless and free.
But Jim's affair with the pen was short-lived. On July 3rd, Jim Morrison was found slouched in his bathtub, dead of an apparent heart attack. From the beginning, his death was shrouded in mystery.
Our manager goes over there, and then he calls me 3 days later and said, we just buried Jim Morrison this morning. I said, well, how did he look? He said, I don't know. He said, I never saw the body. It was a sealed coffin. And I said, time out. You buried a sealed coffin in Père Lachaise Cemetery, and you never saw Jim Morrison's body? He said, no.
In February 1971, Jim Morrison, the 27-year-old icon of the Doors, moved to Paris to get in touch with his poetry roots. But on July 3rd, Morrison was found dead in his bathtub. He had died of an apparent heart attack. Jim's friends and family back in the States were mystified by the lack of details concerning his death.
The French death certificate merely said his heart stopped. But of course, what caused his heart to stop? No one ever found out. If the death certificate on Jim Morrison had said he died of excess, I would have said yes. I can understand that.
Pamela Courson was the only reported witness to his death. She alone of Jim's friends saw the body before it was buried in Paris's famed Père Lachaise cemetery. Courson may have been able to answer some questions, but she died before Manzarek or anyone had a chance to talk to her.
Pamela died very shortly after that, maybe lived a year or two after Jim. I never got to ask her directly what happened. I couldn't do that. I couldn't bring myself to confront his weeping widow lover.
Conspiracy expert Jonathan Benkin suggests that there might have been another explanation for Jim's death.
There was no real official inquest into his death. I mean, even for someone who lived a life like Jim Morrison lived, it's unusual for someone to die of a heart attack at that young age. So, you know, maybe it was a drug overdose, but of course you then get the conspiracy theories that perhaps it was murder, or perhaps he faked his own death, and this is still alive.
Of all these possibilities, Manzarek doesn't believe that Jim Morrison overdosed.
The police inspected his body. There were no, tracks on his arms, no needle marks. It was not a drug overdose.
What about the murder theory? And if Morrison was murdered, who would have killed a rock star? Some die-hard fans believe that he was the victim of a government conspiracy. Like many rock artists in the early 70s, Morrison had become increasingly radical as the war in Vietnam dragged on. Feeding the rumors of a government conspiracy was the fact that Jimi Hendrix and Janis Joplin had died less than a year before. Many fans found it strangely coincidental that three hugely influential artists had all died within months of each other.
There is a popular belief that somehow the establishment conspired to either manipulate or squelch the youth movement of the 60s, not just the rock stars, but of course the Martin Luther Kings and the Malcolm X's. It's not that great of a leap of faith to think that there was some sort of program to actually kill these people. I don't think that's terribly unreasonable.
If there was a conspiracy, and if they did plan on doing it, the reason they did it is because they represented the three archetypes of American youth. The young black man, the young black prince, dressed like a gypsy, singing songs of love and psychedelic madness and beauty. Janis Joplin, the woman, the female principal, singing her heart out, singing the blues. And Jim Morrison, the heir apparent to the throne. He was the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant prince.
But Manzarek isn't completely sold on the government conspiracy theory.
He was not murdered. I don't think the CIA did him in. I don't think the government is smart enough to have stopped Jim, Janis, and Jimmy. And yet it's possible.
You walked on down the hallway, baby.
Others believe that Jim Morrison isn't dead at all. As with Elvis Presley, legions of fans insist that Morrison faked his own death to escape the limelight.
I get people talking to me all the time about Jim Morrison. Jim is everywhere. Jim's in Africa. I got a letter from somebody saying we're going to take a boat and we're going to go to Africa and we're going to find Jim. Because at the end of Wild Child, Jim says, "Remember when we were in Africa?"
You remember when we were in Africa?
Then I got another great letter from Australia, and they said, "I know where Jim Morrison is. Obviously, he's not dead. He's in the outback. He has a broken leg. Please send me $1,500 and I'll go and get him and fix his leg and bring him back." So I thought that was the funniest one I've gotten.
Cynthia Summers, however, says Jim would never have disappeared without taking his lover, Pamela.
Pamela was the love of his life. There has been a theory that that he might still be alive. But if he was still alive, she would have been taken with him. He wouldn't have left her behind.
On the other hand, Ray Manzarek believes if anybody could successfully stage his own death, it would be Jim Morrison.
See, I like to think that if Jim, in fact, staged his own death, he went away and went on a journey to the East. Jim Morrison may very well have become a Buddha. That's what I'm hoping, more than anything.
Is it possible that Jim Morrison is still alive? Or did he in fact die in Paris in 1971? We may soon have a definitive answer to this mystery. There are currently plans to exhume his body in Paris and return it to the United States to be reburied in Los Angeles.
There's a coffin in Père Lachaise Cemetery that may or may not contain the remains of James Douglas Morrison. And that coffin, theoretically, is being taken out of the ground on July 6th or 7th, the year 2001. Jim Morrison is going to be plucked out of the cemetery, and that casket is going to be moved and taken away. Doors fans from all over the world are going to be there screaming, "Open the coffin, open the coffin, open the coffin." I'm going to be there with them. Open the coffin. I don't believe that Jim Morrison is in there. I want to see Jim Morrison in there.
What will we find when Jim Morrison's coffin is removed from Père Lachaise? Will we finally know the truth about this rebellious poet who became a rock star? Until then, he will continue to mystify us in death as he did in life.